On March 15, 2017, Dril tweeted, turning a big dial that says racism on it and constantly looking back at the audience for approval like a contestant on The Price is Right. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. This is the first Dril tweet I've covered since Dril Week last September, and I felt it was an appropriate one. It was one of the first ones to get cut when I whittled down my list for Dril Week. Because I think that this tweet is almost a perfect Dril tweet in a lot of ways, because the actual text of it is pretty silly, but it actually is applicable to a lot of real life situations. Like, what's actually being imagined is a really silly thing to imagine. Someone with a gigantic dial that just says racism on it and pushing it back and forth, looking at the audience like they're on The Price is Right. Like, you know how on The Price is Right, when someone is trying to come up with a bid, they'll look at the audience like 30, 40, 30, but instead of, talking about how much a microwave costs, they're changing the amount of racism. But the way that it's applicable to real life is that it feels like a lot of people, particularly people with no actual principles or morals, always are trying to triangulate how racist they need to be in order to be successful in politics or things like that. And it's most often levied against politicians who are in the center or center left. After Trump won the election last November, many people made the joke that Democrats would be doing this over the next few years. Three-year Fetterman said 2028 Democratic electoral strategy, and Daniel Souter said Democratic Party circa 2024 to 2028. Basically meaning that the assumption was that because they lost, that what they would try to do, instead of, come up with better policies, would be to try to calibrate the perfect amount of racism to win elections. If you're thinking that's morally bankrupt to do, yeah, that's what Dril is satirizing. I don't think that Dril was like, I'm gonna have a screed against politicians when I do this tweet, but I think that this stuff was in his mind. And by the way, if you think this is only a thing that applies to American politicians, I can assure you it's not. Connor Smith tweeted, I can't remember the last time Sinn Féin did something without me thinking of this tweet. In front of the show, Chris Thorburn quoted the tweet with a photo of Rishi Sunak standing behind a podium that says, stop the boats. And obviously, this has only gotten more acute over the past few months and years. And to be clear, this is sometimes also applied to right-wing politicians. I think it's not as often because the assumption is that they'll just put the dial of racism all the way to the end without thinking. But when J.D. Vance was encouraging people to continue with the they're eating the cats memes, even though they were disgustingly racist, Dave Itzkoff tweeted a screenshot of the Dril tweet. A few weeks ago, Jess Morissette posted to Blue Sky the screenshot with the caption, universities trying to figure out how to comply with anti-DEI policies right now. Because basically that's what they're doing. They're using a dial to figure out how racist they need to be in order to not get the wrath of the Trump administration. One of the funnier ways that the dial has been literalized is when Can't Ever Die quoted the tweet and said, Elon, after seeing that Grok is woke, because his AI apparently was saying woke things. I really don't remember this controversy. I don't look into what Elon's AI is doing. And obviously this tweet can be repurposed to talk about other types of prejudice. It's been talked about a lot with transphobia, specifically Democratic politicians turning a big dial mark transphobia. I was a bit surprised that I didn't see anyone saying it about Gavin Newsom's recent turn to be anti-trans, but that also might be because Twitter's search is broken. And I find a political way it's been used is people like Sars. Sars is not the only person who made this joke, changing it so it says, turning a big dial that says tariffs on it, and said Trump admin so far. Because do his tariffs make any more sense than if he was on The Price is Right, changing a knob up and down? Some other silly ways that it's used is when the doomsday clock was 89 seconds to midnight in January, Annie said, turning a big dial that says clock on it and constantly looking back at the audience for approval like a contestant on The Price is Right, which is honestly perfect, because as the community note says, the doomsday clock means nothing. It truly is just people saying like, yo, the vibe is bad, let's say it's this many minutes from midnight, and then they publish that. In response to concept art of a facehugger from Alien Covenant, Jacqueline said, further proof that the Aliens franchise is just turning a big dial labeled Sigmund Freud and looking back at the audience like a contestant on The Price is Right. And for the record, this is why, excluding the Alien vs. Predator films, there is not a bad Alien movie. I said what I said. And definitely the one that's furthest afield from Dril's original intention is when NFL analyst Benjamin Solak tweeted, coordinating an NFL defense in 2024, and edited the photo to say, turning a big dial that says too high on it and constantly looking back at the audience for approval like a contestant on The Price is Right. This is referencing how, of late, a lot of defenses run a thing called too high safeties. It's not important to understand. I think what all of these show, even the ones that are not about racism, is that Dril is really making fun of like the spineless type of person who's constantly always looking for approval for the things they do, especially if they do transgressive things. Like, ooh, you're gonna let me get away with this? This is so exciting. The type of person who needs polling to tell them how to feel about something. And this type of spineless person is honestly the type of person who is often mocked in Dril tweets. I can't fully get into the psychology of Dril and the guy who writes his tweets because I don't know him personally, but I definitely can tell you that he does not like spineless people. Like, there's just way more disdain dripping from this tweet than when he tweets about like pooping in a toilet. Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing at patreon.com/museum of Twitter. You get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, and you can vote when I cover it on Subscriber Sundays.